Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. We're going to start this time with story time. So the other year I was in Pinto's Guns, where it's always a bad idea for me to be, and I noticed they had a 42-inch octagonal 45 caliber muzzleloader barrel sitting on a table at a very, very cheap price. And I thought, So I went and looked at the parts gun rack, and there was a Montgomery Ward single-barreled 12-gauge, well on its way to the dustbin of history. And I thought, I have a bad idea. So I bought the barrel, 42 inches of it, and the old Montgomery Ward shotgun, and I was out the door, including tax, for about 95 bucks. And I did what I intended to, which was turn down and put a section of the 45 caliber barrel on the ancient Montgomery Ward shotgun, and I chambered it in 45 Colt, made a barrel band with a sight, manufactured a rear sight for it in an old school fashion, and be damned if it didn't work. And of course I had to modify the ejector so that it would eject 45 Colt, because 12 gauge or 16 gauge or whatever this was originally, I think it was 12, the ejector is obviously not going to reach the rim of 45 Colt, and it makes a handy little package, and it works pretty well. And interestingly, I found in a hole in the buttstock under the butt plate, there was a hunting license from 1935. So there was a whole video about this, but that was the genesis of this madness. So after that, a friend of mine saw the video and said, I have a couple garbage single shot shotguns sitting around. You can have them and do interesting things with them. So he handed them off to us, and the next result, that was not the shotgun falling over, that was a random bar stock. The next result was the Bubba Thumper 12-gauge slug gun, which still needs a rear sight, I notice. And this turned out to be a lot of fun, and at only 5.5 pounds, it is highly advisable to shoot 1-ounce slugs through it. And I made the shell carrier and various other things. This one, of course, needed fewer modifications, and I shortened the barrel to over the federal minimum 18-inch barrel length, and there's a video about that. So this left me with another shotgun, a 16 gauge, and I didn't really know what to do with it. I mean, I took it apart, I cleaned it up, scoured large amounts of rust off it, and wasn't really sure what to do, because I'd already done the 45 Colt carbine, and I'd already done a shorty 12 gauge. So what to do? Still had some of that muzzleloader barrel. Now, some of it got reused and repurposed for other things, but there was still a good sized chunk of it. So I carefully measured it, and it was 15.5 inches, shorter than the federally mandated legal 16-inch minimum length for a rifle barrel. Well, poop. But then I got interested in something else, and I thought maybe I need to use that section of 45 Colt barrel for something else. Actually, the 45 muzzleloader barrel. Maybe I have something to do with that. Now, before we get into what that is and do the big reveal, I'd like to shout out to my supporters on Patreon. This all costs money. Your contributions help more than you know. And if you would like to join my supporters on Patreon, there is a link in the description below. Also like to thank channel benefactors who have made donations of ammo, crap shotguns, services, just all sorts of help to the channel. So thank you all very much. Now, we're still in story time. So there's some controversy around this, but personally I consider the Judge revolver and its ilk, which are chambered in .45 Colt and .410, to be interesting, fun, and relatively useless. Because not only does the .410 shot shells expand very, very rapidly out of the short handgun barrels, they also have a tragic loss of velocity, which would tend to render them suboptimally effective, even if the shot pattern stayed pretty tight. But I did notice one particular type of load presented some interesting potential. Now, mostly when you fire shot shells through a rifled barrel, especially a short rifled barrel, the centrifugal force tends to cause the pattern to spread even more than it would normally be inclined to do, which renders them a very dubious proposition. But one sort of load seemed to have anomalously good performance out of the Judge type revolvers, and those were the 0.00 buck loads, where I saw people shooting them at 7 to 10 yards and producing very respectable patterns, which should not be. The thing is that the 3 bowls, or 4 in the 3-inch shells, are all in a line because they're too big to be offset. They're .38 caliber. And I thought, what if the wad is acting like a sabot and engaging the rifling and giving some stability to those balls so that they fly closer together? My .45 caliber muzzle loading barrel has a rifling pitch suited to ball ammunition. You can see where I might be going with this. I thought, with its 1 in 40 rifling pitch, maybe it would do an even better job of stabilizing those inline 0.00 buckshot. And I can, cut the chamber for .45 Colt and then ream it out further to accept .410 shotgun shells. And I did. As, spoilers from the title, this is the result. It is a .45 Colt .410 shotgun. Now, I did wind up doing the very long foregrip because I like that. And I fussed around for quite a while trying to figure out how to set the latch for the handguard. And then I finally thought, oh, screw it, and soldered a plate just behind the muzzle device and ran a wood screw through into the forestock. So yes, I have to undo a screw to take the gun apart. Tragedy of limited scope. So I turned the barrel down, sleeved it into the chamber of the 16 gauge, stabilized a crack in the stock, refinished the stock, made the fore end, and this muzzle device. God, I've got burps. Pardon me. Now, why the hell would you put a muzzle device on a gun like this? Well, remember that 15.5-inch barrel? That's why. Because with the muzzle device pinned and welded, it's now a 17.5-inch barrel. And you can see where it's pinned and welded. I did not fully clean that up because I want it to be obvious that it's pinned and welded to avoid federal foolishness. So I modified the ejector to operate with the .45 Colt ammunition and .410 ammunition. And I had to replace a part inside because somehow it had lost the ejector pin that actuates the ejector. I got a hold of William D. Wood, who also has a YouTube channel, who is currently messing with a bunch of single-shot, thrown-out shotguns. I said, hey, you got an Iver Johnson? He says, yeah. Well, let me have a look at the ejector mechanism. And it turned out it's just a pin. I could do pins. Now, I did cut a flat on top of the barrel to mount a sight eventually. But I didn't want to, I only wanted to invest so much work before I actually made sure it worked. And so I just got some 3/16 inch brass rod, chucked it up in my handy dandy battery powered drill, and turned out a little ball on the end on my belt grinder, polished it up, cut some 832 screw threads on it, drilled a hole, tapped it for 832, screwed it in with some Loctite, and Bob's your uncle. Now, that still leaves me with no rear sight, but I did notice that the breech stands somewhat proud of the chamber since I cut the flat on it. So I just filed a U-notch in there, which for test purposes is adequate. So everything works. Oh, and there was no butt plate, so I made a simple steel butt plate, which I may cut some lines across to give it a little bit of traction on the shoulder. As it is, it was not really an issue, but it might be kind of nice. So I took it to the range with some 45 Colt ammo and some 410 ammo to give it a whirl. And we'll look at that footage in a minute. But I have to tell you we're back to story time again. I had a bunch of 45 Colt ammo with 200 grain semi-wad cutters loaded in it. And I had it because I didn't shoot it because the primers are unreliable. Let me tell you about these primers. At some time in the past, God knows how long in the past, a fellow swept up the floor of his shop, gathered up all the primers and dumped them in a jar. And they were all small pistol or large pistol primers. And then that jar sat in his unknown random shop for an unknown random length of time. And about 13 years ago, he gave them to my buddy Jake. And they sat on his shelf for 10 years. When I called him up and said, hey, you got any primers? During COVID, primer shortages. He said, sure, and brought the jar over and handed it to me. And they are unreliable, as you will see in the video. So I'd loaded up a bunch of ammo with them, found out the primers are unreliable, and there they sat. But I figured, I'm just testing, seeing if anything falls off or falls apart. They'll do. You'll see the results in the video. Now, I'm suspecting that the hammer spring in this might be a little light, because I had an issue with one of the many shot shells I fired today. But again, you'll see that in the video. Let's have a look at that. So as you can see, I fired 410 slugs, 45 Colt ammunition, and 3-inch number 6 express loads out of this. And the express loads do not fully eject, which is no surprise. 45 Colt loads started ejecting very nicely after a few shots, so that's all good. And I was on my way out of the range, and I mentioned my theory about the triple-aught buck and expressed an interest in getting some. And one of the ROs, nice fellow, said, hang on, and dug in his bag and produced 2.5-inch triple-aught buck shells and said, want to try it? And I said, hell yes, I do. So he handed me a target, and I gave him back my ID and went back to my lane on the range, set up the camera, and here's what happened. So as you saw, got a pretty tight pattern at 10 yards with those 3 pieces of triple-aught buck. Now, I have found this ammunition to be rather useless in 410 shotguns because at 25 yards, you've only got 3 pellets, and there's one over here, one over here, and one over here. And that's really not good for anything at 25 yards. Now, a cylinder bore shotgun is typically will spread about 1 inch for every yard of distance. So at 10 yards from normal shot shells from a cylinder bore, you would expect a 10-inch pattern. And pretty much that's what I get when I'm shooting my cylinder bore shotgun at that range. Should be worse with rifling, because rifling tends to cause the shot pattern to spread more because of centripetal force, whatever it is. Instead, it's about 1/3 of the size you would expect. So I think there is some stabilization going on, but not more stabilization than you want. I was actually a little concerned that at 10 yards, it would stack the rounds, which I'm sure would be devastating, but it's not really the effect you're going for. So I'm going to have to call this a success. Now, it does need better sights. These sights were fine for test firing it, but you're not going to get super accuracy out of them, and I didn't. With 45 Colt at 10 yards, I was getting patterns like this, and I'm pretty sure that's because of the imprecise nature of the sights. I'm going to put some good sights on it, and we'll find out for sure. But I have to say, I am delighted with this thing. It's very compact. It's nice and light. Recoil is trivial with 45 Colt, and really quite mild, reasonable even, with 410 3-inch express shells. So, yay me. It's a win, and it looks cool. And everybody agrees that while this probably serves absolutely no purpose, it's cool as hell. And it does serve the very nice purpose of keeping Tinker out of federal prison. So there's still some finishing work and things to do on this. It still needs proper sights, but I'm really pleased with this. It's come out really neato. And I now have a trio of tiny top break guns that were on their way to the trash heap of history, and now have new and useful lives. I'm going to go with useful. The Bubba Slugger is going deer hunting with me next year, so it's definitely going to be useful. And this one, I'm not sure it's ever going to be anything but a fun toy, but it's a really fun toy. So, that's it for this time. I hope this finds you well. Stay safe, take care, and we'll talk to you again real soon.